Jeff, you guys all set? Okay, let me call to order the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency meeting for today, October 20th. You please rise. Mike, you want to lead us in the pledge?
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Chair Mulhart.
Here.
Director Faven. Here. Director Bennett. Here. Director Kelly.
Here.
Director Borchard.
He probably will be here a little bit later, and Sam McIntyre is in the audience. I don't see any other alternates. Okay. Agenda review. Do you, Jeff?
We do have a change to the agenda. Item number 9's been deleted, and for a variety of reasons, but it will not be coming back to your board in the form that it was in now, so it's a complete deletion. We also have a matter of urgency for your board that council is prepared to speak about that we would like to get on closed session today, and I'll turn it over to Al for that.
Yes, thank you. Under the Brown Act, the board may consider a non-agenda item provided it determines that there's a need for immediate action. By way of background, staff was advised subsequent to the agenda being posted that the City of Ventura had proposed that the GMA and the city enter into a tolling agreement. And I think probably the simplest way to explain it is to go through the brief recitals in the draft agreement, which state, just paraphrasing, that the city has proposed to approve the Saticoy Wells Community Plan and a related environmental impact report. The GMA contends that the environmental analysis with respect to the Saticoy Yard well is inadequate, and the city disputes that contention. The parties, however, wish to continue efforts at a resolution of the dispute without the need for litigation. And because there would be a need if the city, at its scheduled council meeting on November 16, approves the project with the well included as part of it, there would be a need for the GMA to initiate any legal action under CEQA within 30 days. That this tolling agreement has been proposed, although it's my understanding that the agreement has not been approved by the City Council. And so therefore, under the Brown Act, if your board, in view of the attendance today, by a unanimous vote, determines that there is a need for immediate action on the proposed tolling agreement, that cannot wait the next regularly scheduled meeting, and since there is no meeting scheduled for November, that next regular meeting is not until December, then based on that determination, your board could consider this item even though it's not on the agenda, and it would be further recommended that your board consider the matter in closed session because it would fall within one of the exceptions under the Brown Act for anticipated litigation and would involve discussions between the agency and its legal counsel.
Okay. Jeff, anything else? Okay. All right. Members, you have any questions on council's comments or briefs?
Not on council's comments, but on the some others on agenda review.
Okay. We're talking about
just this right now.
Just this issue of either it will require a motion and a vote to put this item on the agenda for closed session, or make a finding that it is an emergency item that has to be dealt with,
I would move to make a finding that this is not an emergency ordinance, but a subsequent need item to be placed on the agenda.
Second.
Okay, is that what you want?
Correct. It's not an emergency item. It's an item that came to the agency's attention after the posting of the agenda.
All right, that's the motion, that's a second. Any discussion? Let's have a roll call, please.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
I will move to place this on the agenda for today,
Okay, in closed session.
in closed session.
Okay, that's the motion and a second. Is that the format you want? Okay, roll call.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Okay. Next item under agenda review.
Director Bennett had a request
Okay.
that items, the informational items, be placed after the action items. That is, items 5, 6, 7 be handled after item 11.
Okay, and as I understand it, there's time constraints for both you and Charlotte, so that's why I'll try to push it through. Everybody okay with that change?
I applaud that. I was going to ask the same thing, so.
Okay, all right.
Great minds think along.
There you go. Okay, so without any objection, we will do it in order of 1 through 4, 8, 10, 11, and then finish up with 5, 6, and 7. That'll be the new order, okay? All right, very good. Public comments, opportunity for somebody in the public to address the GMA on GMA issues that are not on the agenda.
Good afternoon. I'm Vicki Musgrove with the City of Ventura, and I'm kind of talking about the agenda as a whole, I would say. When I got the agenda yesterday, we noticed at the City of Ventura that there seemed to be a lot of action to move very quickly in a lot of different directions, and it's a little bit hard to tell quite what the exact goals of all these different directions are. But I just wanted to say that we are urging you to slow down a little bit, and particularly if in fact a lot of the directions are about the Oxnard forebay and the pumping of the county yard well and the City of Ventura's involvement in that. Just wanted to let you know that we're working very closely, very carefully with the groundwater scientists, with the GMA, with the TAG, with the SAG, with all of the experts, and we've talked very recently to Jeff Pratt. We're very interested in protecting all of our groundwater resources. There's not one drop of water that has been pumped from that well at this time, and yet there is a lot of interest in getting that well online. Doing some analysis, seeing where it's pumping from, what it's doing, and what the effects are. So just wanted you to know that as you go through the entire agenda and all the different things, that the City of Ventura is very willing to collaborate and to work with you and to come up with something that works and that protects our groundwater basins.
Okay, I thank you for those comments. All right, very good. Anybody else have comments for the GMA?
Last week there was a State Water Resources Control Board hearing on the chlorides on this Santa Clara River. This is, dealing with the wastewater treatment plants in LA County. And as you may know, we thought we all had a process that we've been working on for years, and then the council people in Santa Clarita, over threat of being recalled, didn't vote the money to start the project. So this came to the state board, and the state board said, better get with it, so they passed it unanimously. So now the Santa Clarita people have a decision to make about whether they pay fines or whether they build something. So we got what we wanted on that anyway.
Okay, thank you. Very good.
My name is Jim Engel. My wife and I reside in the county off of Grimes Canyon Road. We have a small farm. We have a well on that farm we put in 1991. At the time we put that in, the static water level for that well was 519 feet. I submitted a letter discussing an issue with that well, dated the 28th of September. That letter was addressed in a response dated October the 20th from the management agency. And let me just kind of recap a little bit of that. In 91, as I say, when we put that well in, we had a pretty decent static water level. It was well above our pump at that time. In September of last year, I had Edison run a test on that well, and we determined that the static water level had dropped by 45 feet. Not dramatic, but for some concern. I had him run a test again this year, and his dropped another 33 feet. So, as I say, I was concerned. I wrote a letter to the agency with several questions in it that were responded to quite adequately in the response. I asked whether there was a drop in the static water level across the entire aquifer, or was it localized? Was it a global issue? I think that was talked about. You have a monitoring well that's about a mile northwest of me. The response was that that level in that well had in fact been dropping, but that other wells in the area had not all experienced the same drop, so that you can't make a generalized statement that in fact they could be the localized areas. It's a matter of strata, it's a matter of the geography, it's a matter of the stresses from pumping in the area. I asked if the agency had a model. They indicated in the response that you do not have a model. You have something you work with another agency, but again, you do not have something that you might be able to predict. Now, obviously, we've had a drought for the last several years, so you would expect this. Now, other issues in this general area where I am, the Callegas Municipal Water District has put in a number of wells. I believe it's somewhere in the area of 18. I'm not sure of that number. I'm sure there's people in this room that can tell you the exact number. That is part of their aquifer storage and recovery system. And when I first read about it, I thought it was an excellent idea. Now, I don't know how many of these wells are operating at this time. I get information that's somewhat conflicting. I get one source that tells me none of the wells are operating. I have another source that tells me that he thinks that maybe up to 9 of these wells are operating intermittently. Again, I don't know. So I have a question relative if, in fact, a water level could be impacted in a localized area. In other words, you could have a strata that might be affected in a localized area. Then, to my mind, there is a question, if someone has put in 18 wells, and I understand that these are potentially 3,000 gallon a minute wells, and if you're operating a number of them at some point, what impact could that have? I'm certainly not a hydrologist. I couldn't answer that question, but certainly you people might. So what I'd like to enter into in the minutes here is a proposal. And that proposal would be the County District 19 has 2 wells on Maria Drive that are both above and below me. They have, I believe, static water tubes that can measure the static water level in these wells. I would propose that we do a test, that we monitor the static water level in those 2 wells while the Callegas wells are operating at some anticipated nominal typical levels of operation. And we determine whether they do in fact have any impact on the static water level for wells operating in that area. And we can determine whether in fact there is any impact. If there is, maybe we can determine some potentially mitigating way of operating these things that they don't impact. We can maybe do more extensive tests. Again, I'm not making any accusation at this point. I have no data to base that on. All I know is that the water level is dropping. Nobody can tell me whether it could be impacted by wells operating in that area, and I'd like some answers to that question. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Because this is a public comments, the board can't specifically take action, but I've seen the letters going back and forth. These are technical issues that have to be addressed, and I will assume that the staff will do what it normally does with its constituents and respond to the questions as appropriate. So that's probably the best direction we have right now. And then if there's some specific thing that we have to do in the future or specific recommendation in the future, we'll have to get it on the agenda and deal with it. Okay? All right. Anybody else in the audience have anything else not on the agenda? All right. Thank you, sir. Henry, you have something on? Oh, okay. Okay, board member comments? Anybody? Okay. Let's go to the consent items. We have a motion to approve and
I'll second that.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. Okay, let's go to item number 8. We just approved them on a consent. Yeah.
Here we go.
All right. Yes,
Good
sir.
afternoon, Chair Molhart, board members, members of the audience, Gerhard Hubner, Watershed Protection District. I will be presenting this item, item number 8, which is a proposed resolution 2009-5, a resolution adjusting the groundwater surcharge rate pursuant to Chapter 5.8 of the Ordinance 8.1. A little background for you. As you recall, back in October of 1998, the GMA board adopted resolution number 98-2, setting the surcharge at $7.25 per acre foot for well owners and operators of groundwater who pumped above an established allocation. Last year in October, at the October meeting, exactly a year ago, approximately, you adopted resolution 2008-9, increasing the surcharge to $950 per acre foot, effective January 2009, or this year. Historically, the GMA has tied its surcharge rates to Cayugas Municipal Water District's tiered rates. This past September, Cayugas adopted a revised Tier 2 water rate of $1,045 per acre foot. And these Tier 2 rates, as you recall, are set to recover the cost to import portable water from the Met. I'll just make it short. The tier designation is employed by both MWD and Cayugas to distinguish between the cost of maintaining a reliable supply, Tier 1, and the cost of developing additional supplies above the historical deliveries, Tier 2. The Tier 2 rates are most applicable and most appropriate rate to set per our ordinance, Section 5.8.1.1, and I won't read it for you, but it's there. Well, I can see that it jumped to the conclusions here, so I'll get right to it. The cost and reliability of imported water continues to rise and remain uncertain as to future availability. Agency staff considers the agency's groundwater extraction surcharge as a disincentive to groundwater overpumping. It should be noted that the number of operators in surcharge modes has decreased from 75 to 18 operators over the past year, although I would say we don't know definitively whether that was a cause of the surcharge increase or other actions that the agency has undertaken. And it's just like I said, unknown if these actions cause this to happen or not. It's also difficult to know exactly what particular dollar amount would provide sufficient disincentive. The proposed surcharge rate in the resolution reflects Cayugas' recent Tier 2 increase of 19%. So the calculation which we propose is taking the current surcharge rate, which is $950, plus Cayugas' Tier 2 rate increase, that 19%, that comes to about $180. Do the math, that's $1,130, and round it up to $1,150 for a total surcharge rate. We believe this is necessary in the event the supply of imported water is limited or restricted. We do believe, as we did and we discussed at last year's meeting, that the surcharge rate should be revisited and possibly revised if and when there are any increases in MET's or Cayugas' Tier 2 rate increases. So with that, we do recommend adoption of Resolution 2009-5, approving the groundwater extraction surcharge rate of 1,150 acre-feet, effective January 1st, 2010, to give folks the ability to adjust in a couple months to realize that's the increase. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Members have any questions? Audience, any comments? Okay. Hearing no comments from either side. This adjustment is consistent, I think, with what the board has talked about over the last several years, that disincentive, that number has to rise to reflect the cost and value of the water. So I believe it's a reasonable increase that we have to undertake, given the fact that Cayugas faces the same problem because of MET's requirements. We need to follow that. And I think we've been very abundantly clear to folks that are paying penalties that this number is going to shift in time. And I don't know if it went from 75 to 18 as a result of that shift, but we got to reflect the value in the marketplace. So anyway.
Mr. Chairman, I support this, but I would like to see if maybe we could add one thing to it. If someone should exceed their allocation or their efficiency allocation, I would, in excess of 10%, I would hope we would add it to $1,500 after 10% of excess. The Cayugas tiered rate peaks out, I think, at 3,300, Henry? I've forgotten. They have 3 tiers, and it's multiples of the Tier 2 rate, I thought. But, I mean, somewhere we need a stair step upward. So a slight error is one thing, an egregious error is another thing.
Al, can we, since we have a resolution, and in the discussion that we had, we talked about taking it to this number. We didn't talk about coming up with an additional structure. Can we do that at this meeting, or is it something we have to clean up at the next time?
I think if you're looking at a tiered structure that would include a substantial increase in the proposed surcharges, then the preferred approach would be to address that at a subsequent meeting.
Okay.
Address that as a...
At a later meeting. My fear is that, one, we need to get on with it. Number two, we could so aggressively get up to a number that triggers a whole bunch of unintended consequences, and they may not be favorable for any of us. So,
when this all was introduced, I think we were up at Los Robles, where the first thing was presented, and they had 3 tiers, and the third level did have shock effects. So,
yeah, and I think we've asked staff to look at this basically on an annual basis to keep it moving. You've heard Mike's comments, and it may be at the next go-around, if it's not accomplishing the objectives, we may have to reflect a different formula that more mirrors what MET's doing.
what is the in percent of overuse, what percent over is the most aggressive excess user?
I don't know if we can get that for you, but I don't know if the other figures.
Within 500% in either direction.
I know of one. I don't know if it's the most aggressive user, but that would be that would double, so 100%, maybe a little.
So that would exceed 10% then, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I'm not sure we can, anyway. All right, anybody else, any other questions or comments? Yeah, okay. Any other questions?
No.
Yes, ma'am.
I was going to make a motion.
Yes, ma'am, please.
I would move to adopt resolution number 2009-5 approving an adjusted groundwater extraction surcharge rate of $1,150 effective January 1st, 2010.
I'll second that.
Okay, any other discussion? Any other comments? Roll call, please.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, let's deal with item number 10. This will be an easy 5-minute exercise. This is total agreement across the table. I can feel the love in the room for this item.
Appreciate the preamble.
You notice your back is the target to this. You know, I can actually see the arrows coming.
Did my wife sew the bullseye on?
Yeah. When we talk about boundaries and Ken Ortega shows up to the meeting, I know we've got something big going here. And Frank Royer and Ken show up. I haven't seen Frank in years, so obviously we've hit a nerve here, and I'm glad your turn to them, and I can see the arrows coming. So let's have this.
Well, I do have a 3-year-old, so I do have the eyes in the back of my head. But for the record, Brian Bondi, Joint Staff, United Water, and Fox King and GMA. Item 10 is discussing potential legislative change to modify the agency's boundary or the authority of the agency to manage areas outside of its current territory. And this follows from the June report that I gave regarding the agency boundary. During that report, there was some discussion about areas outside of the agency where the basins that lie within the agency extend beyond the agency's boundary. A little bit of discussion about how it might be necessary in the future to manage the groundwater resources in those areas so that we can maintain safe yield and achieve BMO's basin management objectives within the agency. So today's item 10 is a follow-up on that discussion. And the purpose of the item is to give your board an opportunity to pursue amendments to the GMA Act that would extend the agency's authority to manage resources in those areas that I described, and I'll show those on a map in a moment. Specifically, the reason we're bringing this item this month has to do with the state's legislative calendar. The simplest way to say this is you get one realistic shot per year to introduce a bill and get it through the process. The deadline for submitting bills comes early in the calendar year, so this would be the opportunity now, if your board decided that action was necessary, to get the ball rolling. There is opportunity to seek a rider on a bill later in the year if you miss the deadline to introduce a bill, but as you've seen in the past, some of you may have been on the board. The last time this was done, that was a difficult process and it proved to be unsuccessful. So realistically speaking, the best opportunity is to get a bill introduced at the beginning of the legislative calendar for the year. So today we'll briefly review the agency boundary issues that we talked about in June, discuss the legislative change approach, and then hear feedback from the board. So as we discussed in June, we have the agency's boundary here, the red line, and we have groundwater basins that lie within the agency and then in some cases extend outside the agency boundary. And just as a reminder, the agency boundary is defined as the territory or land that overlies the Fox Canyon Aquifer. And I believe back in June, Chair Mulhart mentioned that was a good approach for determining the territory of the agency back in the 1980s when the agency was formed. But as we've learned more about the local geology and groundwater resources, we've come to understand that that these portions of the basins, the shallow aquifers above the Fox Canyon that extend beyond the boundary, do have hydraulic communication with those portions of the basins that lie inside the agency. So one might describe those areas as potential impact areas because activities, pumping, things that affect recharge, any activities that could affect management in the basin could limit the agency's ability to meet its goals within the territory of the agency. And I want to show a few cross-sections just to, oops, had some arrows pointing to those areas. Forgot about my fancy fly-ins. Look at two cross-sections to help understand what this looks like in 3 dimensions, why we have these areas outside the agency and how they're related to the Fox Canyon Aquifer. The first cross-section will come across the forebay, north part of the Oxnard Plain, Pleasant Valley Basin, and what we want to focus in on is the cross-section portion that shows the shallow alluvial system over here in Pleasant Valley and its relationship with the underlying units. The second cross-section I'll show comes up the plain, Oxnard Plain, and across the forebay, and that one will illustrate the relationships in the outlying area here. So the first section, again, comes across roughly northwest to southeast and comes across the Pleasant Valley Basin. And what you see here is a fault, and there's been movement along this fault that has created a condition where the deeper units are not absent, but the shallow units that were deposited after the deeper units cross that fault, and there's some degree of hydraulic communication between what's within the agency and the area outside the agency.
And then does the shallow unit affect, does water there migrate down into the deeper aquifers also?
There is the potential for that. The degree of communication with the alluvium here and, for example, say the Fox Canyon Grimes is something that hasn't been looked at in great detail in this particular
It's not known. Okay, thank you.
Yes. But what's good to recognize, important to recognize, is that there is probably definitely communication in the shallow units. So the agency is charged with managing all the groundwater within all of these units, not just the Fox Canyon. So the importance of the communication across this boundary in the shallow units is the point for this area. The second cross-section, again, coming roughly north-south up through the Oxnard Plain and into the forebay, shows how we have units that extend beyond the agency's boundary, even though there's no Fox Canyon there. You can see that the older aquifers, the Fox Canyon and the Hueneme, have been folded by tectonic stresses and uplifted. They were eroded off, and on top of them, the Mugu and Oxnard aquifers were deposited. And what you can see here is that because of the folding and the structure of the deeper units, they were truncated basically at this point, and that's where the agency boundary is defined now, based on.
For that reason? Is that why the agency boundary was drawn right there?
No, the criteria in the Act define the agency as the extent of the Fox Canyon. The reason that that's located here in this map is because of the geologic stresses and structure. So the agency boundary would be then here where the Fox Canyon ends, leaving us with portions of the upper aquifer system, the Oxnard and Mugu aquifers that extend beyond the agency boundary, but yet have complete, full hydraulic communication all the way out onto the plain. And so the takeaway point is here that the recharge in this, the whole part, all of the forebay, but including this area, is critical to combating seawater intrusion at the coast and so on and so forth. This portion, again, lies outside the agency. Real quickly, bring to your attention or remind you that in the 2007 update to the groundwater management plan, this cross-hatched area here with the potential impact area that we're pointing to was identified in the management plan as an area recommended for inclusion within the agency. And again, that has to do with the understanding of the hydraulic communication in the shallow aquifers, the Oxnard and Mugu, across the GMA's boundary, the importance of recharge in this area. You have United's spreading operations here. You have the Santa Clara River coming through. I think we all understand in this room the critical nature of the recharge in this part of the basin for attaining safe yield, combating seawater intrusion, so on and so forth. Although we have some information that suggests there may be Fox Canyon materials in some of these areas beyond the current interpretation of the limits of the Fox Canyon, those data currently are insufficient to conclude and demonstrate the presence of the Fox Canyon. So the recourse here for the agency at this point would be to seek legislative change to include this area at this time. So again, just in summary, why would we seek legislative change or seek to amend the GMA Act? Again, the management plan is already recommended for solid technical reasons to include the remainder of the forebay within the agency. That plan, again, was updated in 2007 and adopted by your board. Secondly, some of the other areas that I pointed out on the map previously may have similar issues. We understand those areas less. They weren't studied in detail for the management plan update, but your board may decide that in the future those areas might need to be managed, and so the flexibility to address concerns in those areas might be necessary. What would the scope of amending the Act be? There's a lot of options. They basically break down into two general categories. One would be to make an explicit change of the boundary. There's a couple different ways you could do that. You could do a meets and bound legal description of what the new territory is. Another approach would be to reference geographic things like the basins. Your board could act to include some areas, but not others. There's a lot of flexibility and options in there, and we'll leave that for the board to debate. The other class of approaches would be to essentially leave the boundary as it is, the red line, but add language to the Act that provides your board the authority to regulate activities beyond that boundary to the extent that those activities are affecting the agency's ability to meet basin management objectives, safe yield, so on and so forth. That approach would mirror the Ventura County Flood Control Act that created the Watershed Protection District. They have some legislative powers to manage and address issues that extend beyond the district's boundary in as much as they affect the district's ability to manage flood control issues within the agency. A third option would be some hybrid of the two, making some explicit changes and then also adding the broader authority suggested under item 2. So options, where we go from here, there's 4 possible options. There may be more. Obviously, number 1 is no change. Leave things as they are. Second would be to move forward with directing staff to take the necessary steps to introduce a bill for the 2010 legislative calendar. And let me just real quickly give you a snapshot of what that would entail. That would be that would require quick and efficient action to do that. Basically, we'd have to have language in by February 19th. I won't go into the details of the legislative process, but if there are questions, I can try and address them. We also have Sue Hughes or she was here. Oh, you moved up front. Thanks. Who could better explain the details of the process. Option 3 would be to not try and get a bill introduced at the beginning of the legislative calendar. Perhaps your board might feel that we need time for stakeholder discussions, so on and so forth. Doesn't mean we couldn't get a bill in 2010. We could go after a rider, but again, that's less likely to be successful. And lastly would be to seek legislative change at a later date and perhaps initiate stakeholder discussions now leading up to that in the future. So with that, I'll give it to you guys for debate.
Okay, do any members have specific questions on the information that Brian presented. Let me ask this question, and I don't know the name of the bill, but there is a bill working its way through the state right now that would require, effectively, as I understand it, a groundwater management process.
That's Pavley 229.
That's the one I was referring to. And if that bill were to pass, would that would put all of the areas that are outside of our boundary that we believe have impact within our agency, they would have to generate an agency on our fringe to deal with their issues? Or is there in place a mechanism right now that would solve the requirements of that particular bill that I think has a good chance of passing?
I don't know the answer to that question. We can look into that. The first I heard about that bill was Sunday's paper.
Okay.
And the only thing I could add is I think it's in general requiring groundwater monitoring, which we reported in the paper. This county is way ahead of everybody else, including in the other area, unincorporated areas.
Okay. Well, that's my question. If these areas that are outside our boundary that we believe have impact on our boundary will now have some accounting process or some monitoring process, who does that, if anybody to date, and or if it in fact requires a bunch of monitoring, maybe that's the impetus to get them pulled into the fold so that they're under our umbrella and not have two competing agencies or this agency having to deal with the county every time it looks over on the other side of the fence. I don't know. I'm just raising the question if anybody knows the answer to that.
I'm in the same boat with Jeff and Gerhard. I haven't reviewed that proposed bill. But just off the cuff, having more data would certainly help us understand the nature of those impacts and the amplitude or magnitude of those.
Yeah, I don't think the bill proposes a requirement to create a agency of the GMA's level in those areas, but it's a start of a process to look at groundwater up and down the state in those areas that we don't look at groundwater, as I understand it. So, Mike, did you want to say something? Okay. In the audience, anybody have any comments in the audience? Okay. So the question that's before us now is, Henry, did you have some comments on this?
Certainly.
Yes, please.
Henry Gromlich, Cayugas Municipal Water District. It's hard to know where to begin. Cayugas and its purveyors have some concerns about launching a effort to change the statutes that govern the Fox Canyon GMA. In part, and we have the services of the county's legislative analyst, Sue Hughes, here, and you might ask her to give her opinion as to whether legislation introduced ever gets changed on its way to final approval. And in my limited experience, it often does. And the things that you may propose to answer a particular issue at the start may change radically as it goes through the legislative process. And the types of things that I think you might anticipate is the legislature seeking to ensure that everything in the GMA is consistent with other parts of the water code in terms of perhaps integrated Regional Water Management Planning Act or other provisions that actually were easy to write into a bill, but very hard for us to interpret exactly what the implications of that would be. I think further, the proposal that would grant the GMA unspecified ability to change its boundaries in areas where it may feel that there's some influence causes some concerns among our purveyors that operate at the edges of the GMA and have made significant investments in projects to remediate groundwater that is degraded and to do various other projects. Those depend upon really knowing what kind of regulatory environment you're in. And I know that this particular agenda item at our monthly purveyors meeting on Monday caused a great deal of consternation. And mainly just kind of questions as to what the GMA board might be about. So I would urge that if you wish to pursue this further, that you build kind of a base of support that has really been successful in every other time we've gone to the legislature. We've gone with a group of people in the local community all behind and understanding what the intent of the GMA's action would be. And at this point, this was a little bit of a surprise to everyone that I talked to, that you'd be taking this step at this time.
Okay. All right. Any other
I just have one
comments?
question. Were you at our June meeting when this was presented? Before
I
we talked about it?
I was, and what I recall as part of the discussion at that time was that working within your internal boundaries was probably less likely to develop the kind of controversy that adjusting your external boundaries would. Also, I think that if this is, as perhaps has been indicated in public comment and in the presentation, more narrowly focused to deal with issues in the Saticoy area, this may be, I think we agree that that's a problem that you want to address, but I'm not sure that this is really necessary to address that problem. We have existing mechanisms through CEQA, and the GMA has shown itself very effective in dealing with issues upstream in the Santa Clara Valley without having to adjust its boundary to include those. And so I would just urge essentially that you consider more consensus building and also look at alternatives to address the kind of real situation that Mr. Bondi here has presented in terms of issues that might involve influence beyond the boundary, within the boundary.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
In the interest, if in the interest of sort of the town hall dialogue we have, could you put the map back up, please? And I want to ask you a question, Henry.
Sure.
To help me understand your position. The map that shows the aquifer being bigger than the boundary.
That one.
That's good. Yeah, there you go. Right now, the map indicates that there are areas outside of the boundary that are actually part of at least a shallow aquifer of Fox Canyon. Right now, are those areas regulated or monitored in any way? The areas outside?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a variety of folks that are conversant on that. Before I would, I mean, I have a fair amount of knowledge on this, but we also have in the audience the general manager of Camarosa, whose district includes all of the Arroyo Santa Rosa Basin and also has significant portions of the eastern Pleasant Valley. And I would defer to Frank unless he would like me to address that.
Let's assume, I'll be happy to take that answer as he approaches, but I'm not aware of any regulation that is like the Fox Canyon, like the rest of the Fox Canyon is regulated. And assuming that these things are related, in the spirit of the article that came out on Sunday,
yes.
Our groundwaters is an extremely important resource for sort of the collective good of everybody.
Right.
And so my question is, I appreciate you saying there's some other things you could do for a specific thing. I'm not talking so much about the specific thing, but it does seem to me on principle we ought to be interested in getting all the water that is communicating with each other on the Fox Canyon, that somebody could potentially go right outside the boundary and start taking and having an impact on the Fox Canyon, that it ought to be monitored, everybody ought to be aware of it, and everybody ought to be following the same rules with that. If that's the case, how do you propose doing that and not changing the boundary?
Oh, well, yeah. I think, number one, there's a variety of answers to your inquiry. All the public water agencies like Camrose or anyone that operates a well reports annually to the state on that well and their use of that well. There's also a groundwater management plan for the Arroyo Santa Rosa Basin, and that lies wholly within the Camrose Water District, which has shown itself to be a exemplary steward and even developing new water. The area that you see that's demarked on the Santa Rosa Basin, and Frank can address this earlier and subsequent to this, is a very real geological fault with substantial differences in groundwater elevation on either side of that fault. So it isn't an arbitrary line, and the communication between those two areas is negligible. The area outside the GMA is susceptible to influence from outflows from the Hill Canyon treatment plant in the city of Thousand Oaks, and recharge that basin is part of the City of Thousand Oaks water rights decision, and hence is already, in a sense, been taken into regulation. As the Arroyo Canal passes into the GMA, there's little, if any, recharge. There is a shallow, unconfined aquifer in the area, again, to the east of the Pleasant Valley, that has an abundant supply of really poor quality water. And there may be some communication, but again, that long line on the eastern Pleasant Valley has been the extension of the Bailey Fault, and while it probably isn't definable within like a 10-foot line on the sand, it's very real, and you see activity on either side of that much differently. And in the cross-section that Mr. Bondi presented, you do see that there is some communication in the very top aquifer, but typically that area has very high groundwater and is of such poor quality that it isn't being used. And so, the question at that point is, yes, there is the opportunity for migration into the lower aquifer, but it's primarily overpumping and the creation of that hydrostatic pressure from overdraft in the lower aquifer systems that would create the migration of the poorer quality water into the area that you're trying to protect. So I guess that just kind of begins to give you an indication of why, even though the basins themselves extend beyond the GMA's boundary, the boundaries were drawn where they were. It wasn't arbitrary. There is a geological basis that has been studied much more extensively by Camrose in the areas to the right. And with that, unless you have other questions, I can defer to.
Frank, hold on a second. If we get to that point, I'll more than happy to let you address it. What I want to do is, I'm not sure that the solution to the problem is to go through each of the nuances that Henry kind of listed for us. I think the first question to the board is, I would suggest that maybe what we ought to do is develop a statement that, and I'll make up the statement, it may not be the way it is, but if we can establish that there is a clear technical geological connect between inside the boundary to the outside the boundary, the position of the board is we need to bring it inside the boundary. If the geological connect is not there from a technical standpoint, even though it shows up here, but it's really not there because of the things that Henry talked about, and it's something Steve would have to look at, and the United team would look at, and GMA would look at, then we wouldn't bring that in. And if in fact there's clearly a technical geological connect between the two, then we have to go through the process of convincing all of ourselves and whatever agencies are involved that together we go to Sacramento and we say this is something we, the constituents in the area, want. I agree that if you go in and say the GMA wants this, and then the folks in Sacramento get phone calls from everybody in the Blue Moon saying don't pass it, it'll never get passed. You're never going to get it. My experience in dealing with, very limited experience dealing with Sacramento, is it has to be consensus, because no assemblyman wants to put his neck out on the table and then they get chopped off when everybody says no to it. So rather than going through each of these areas, maybe what we ought to do is define the criteria by which, if it meets this criteria, the GMA will take an active part in bringing it within the boundaries. If it doesn't meet this criteria, the GMA's alternative is to constantly monitor the effect of the area just outside the boundary, and if it appears to have an effect, it will use all its powers to and all the appropriate environmental reviews or whatever we have, and up to and including litigation, if necessary, to change and modify the activities outside our boundaries. So maybe that's the tool we use in those areas that aren't so clearly defined from a geological standpoint. And so that's kind of the concept I throw out. What do you guys think?
Well, I think we need to talk about the bigger picture before we talk about each little area. I really do. If everybody wants to do something, we need to look further. If nobody wants to proceed with legislation, there's no point in listening to all of the testimony about all the little things that are outside the line.
I would agree with that. Dave?
My feeling is this is just a bit premature, the seeking legislation at this point. I think there needs to be a lot more stakeholder input, and as we've heard from others, a broader sense of consensus that this is the right direction we ought to seek. I am very concerned about having our whole mission changed up in Sacramento by the legislature up there. And it seems to me if we can affect the changes that we want to do in our locality instead, we'd probably be better off than chancing having our whole agency changed up somehow on us without us realizing it.
I don't think that. Personally, I don't think that. I think that's the. I don't think Sacramento has the time and energy to go in and dwell inside our agency. They're either going to say yay or nay to whatever we propose, and if they'll say yay if we have consensus. So I agree with you. You have to have consensus, and I would agree with you. I think legislative change at this point in time is probably premature. We have to start the discussion. That's what we're doing. We have to come up with some criteria, and it's probably next year at the earliest if we wind up doing anything, because I don't think we have the consensus that you talked about, and I agree with you. You have to have.
I agree with you on most of what you said.
Okay, well, most. Mike.
Yeah, I wake up every morning to a computer full of the articles out of Sacramento Bee and several other political watches. And I think this year, this is ill-conceived and premature. Everybody in Sacramento considers themselves a water genius this year. And I think that I would disagree with you that there might not be people who might want to change your manner of doing things. I think that very easily some of the people up there are being strongly driven. I go to Northern California a lot to visit family and stuff, and the drive up there would be to enjoyably cause some mischief elsewhere. I think there's a very poor time to go to Sacramento.
Okay, Steve?
If you go to Sacramento with consensus, I have reasonable confidence. Just like you said, you can't get anything passed unless there is consensus. So I'm not overly worried that you're going to get something changed without consensus also. I mean, just when it comes to this kind of thing, I think there are other things, bigger things that people can, pin up on their political, resume. But I don't think so. I'm not overly worried about that issue of us getting, legislation monkeyed with, if we're going with consensus, because that's the whole point. You can't get it through Sacramento if you don't have the consensus. So I am, and clearly just hearing the board members here, the board doesn't even have consensus to go at this point in time. But I am attracted to to have the dialogue and see if we can get buy-in on your concept. I think it makes sense. It just makes common sense. If they're linked, if they're geologically linked, then our concept ought to be they ought to come in. First, we need to determine that, and then we figure out. We spend the time, if we got that agreement, and we spend the time trying to figure out what kind of legislation best achieves that. So I'd be very interested in the second half of your proposal, which was can we get agreement on that concept? Because it seemed to make common sense.
Charlotte?
Yeah, from conversations I've had with staff in the last, year or two, I've become convinced we need to do something. Maybe we need more investigation. After today, I'm convinced the first thing we need to do is do more than talk to me or us and discuss it with the stakeholders we have and develop some consensus. And when that happens, we need to go to Sacramento, maybe in a year, maybe in June. You have to wait till after election next year to talk to anybody, because we have people from this area who will not be up there after there, because then they'll be termed out. I think we want to work with more than I was concerned about finding a representative in Sacramento. We want at least 3 of them. A senator who represents everybody and a couple of people who represent this area. So we want them all to jointly support a bill. I don't believe we have to worry about people going in and digging into what we're doing. They have a lot of other whipping boys that are a whole, statewide, they're bigger than we are. We're really pretty small potatoes in Sacramento. I think that if somebody wanted to change it, it would be because somebody in our area called up and said, I want this changed. I don't think there's going to be a person from out of the area try to change it. I think that was kind of a threat on Henry's part. Didn't appreciate it, Henry. But if we don't have our ducks in a row down here, then we're in trouble. But at any time we wanted our bill pulled, we could also pull it. And I don't think we need to be worried about being a big thing. I think water may even become passé up there. They now have the administrative office of the courts up there with their billions and billions and billions of dollar computer system, and that's going to be the big whipping boy next year. So maybe by 2011, after we've talked this to death in a few meetings, we can come up with something we want introduced. A year from now, find a new person who could then carry it over if they had to have a 2-year bill. We'd get something that would be good, that would be supported by our associates, our stakeholders, and we'd get where we need to get. But I do think we have to do something.
If you go through this list of recommendations, here a brief, consider directing staff to pursue legislative change, seeking a sponsor and authorize trips. I don't hear any consensus from any of the members that today's the day to authorize the GMA to start down this road. So let's take that off the table. That's not going to happen. I do think that the way to address this is to define, and Steve, I may have to turn to you and Brian, and is it possible to come up with criteria that says if it meets this criteria, it ought to be within the agency, that is different than when we first created the agency years ago and defined it as the Fox Canyon? Is it possible to do that? And does that make sense? Does my proposal makes sense at all?
Yeah, I think so.
You got Steve. I got Steve. You've done the drill, and you've watched.
Yeah, I think
do
so.
this many times,
every approach has its own little problem, of course. Nothing is completely set on these, but I think we could definitely come up with some criteria, and certainly better than we have now. I think.
Well, then
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
It was said by Mr. Bonney that there wasn't, or through initial investigations, there wasn't enough data to determine geological confirmation of the extent of the boundary, and what does it take to get to that point? Is it reviewing past well logs in the area, or what's that process, or has it already been done?
In part, it's been done. If we look at the area that's up there on the north part of the forebay there, we're not having difficulty with communication of that area with the rest of with the forebay that's in the GMA. We have lots of evidence of that. We've had some monitoring in the past when we were having to define where the edge of the Santa Paula Basin was, so we have really good evidence there. The problem gets to be of whether or not there's Fox Canyon sitting at the bottom of that, because it's an older unit, but it may or may not be Fox Canyon. So I don't think we have any trouble with the fact that there's communication going on there with the rest of the forebay. So that's not a problem at all. So if we're talking about that, that's an easy one. There have been some studies done on the east side of Pleasant Valley, and they were less definitive about the communication of that shallow water with what you see in the deeper aquifer. So I think we're not there on that one yet. The kind of thing we looked at, for instance, that we thought were definitive was up in the forebay. We could see shallow wells that were close to the river. You could see the pulses for releases, for instance, that United Water does in the fall. You could see water levels come up with areas within the GMA there, and wells all the way out into that area that's not in the GMA saw the same kind of a rise. So we have pretty good evidence of that connection there. That's about as straightforward as you can get.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay. I'll throw it out as a starting point, because I think we need to either address this problem and deal with those areas that have to impact, or put this issue to bed once and for all so it doesn't come up again. We have adjusted the boundaries. We did it in '91, and as we get better and better at our technology of trying to predict what's going on, we need to either take care of those areas or put it to bed. I would propose that as a staff function, without actually doing the work per se, you ought to come up with the criteria by which you could then, from a professional standpoint, say, technically speaking, this is connected and there is at least X percentage of impact from one side of the boundary to the other, and based on that, our professional recommendation would be that it be included in the boundary. We ought to have that criteria, and you guys need to figure out what that criteria is, and then maybe we ought to do is, as a board, determine, and in public process, do we accept that criteria, and if we all accept that criteria, let's go see where it applies. And then where it applies, then we're going to have to deal with the legislative issue. And we need to either put this ball in play in a logical sequence. The process, and I appreciate staff putting it on the agenda, is to run to Sacramento, and we don't have anything to run to Sacramento with. And if you go through the process of defining the criteria, you build consensus, you commit the staff to analyze specific areas against that criteria, you're doing the process of building the consensus, which allows you to go to Sacramento to get the end game, and that is to manage the aquifers that we're responsible for. And so anyway, that would be my proposal.
Mr. Chairman, I've attempted to sit in on the TAG meetings and SAG meetings, all of them. Only the most recent TAG meetings, these exact discussions you're asking for, were attempting to be done. The learned experts in this room were all sitting there discussing it, and I don't think they've come to an absolute consensus of opinion, but it appears to me they were working in that direction. So I think the process you're looking for is all well underway if you just give it some time.
Okay. All right. Are you comfortable with that comment? Okay. Then when you have, let's say it that way, when you have the criteria by which you are prepared to say, if it meets this criteria, then we'll take the ball the next yard down the field. In the meantime, continue on with the process of looking at some kind of technical criteria that will define whether you're in or out. And it's just purely a staff function right now. As far as legislative relief, I don't see that happening. It's way too early
No.
now. Okay? Everybody okay with that direction? Out there, and Frank, if you want to speak, you're more than happy, but I'm trying to save you that if we're not going to get there. So, all right, thanks. Okay, that's enough on that one. All right, anybody, unless anybody else has any comments? Okay. Henry is up twice against Rob at 0. I'm not trying to keep score here, but I told you we. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, number 11, real quick.
Good afternoon again. Chair Mulhart, board members, Gerhard Hubner for the record. My pleasure to present item number 11, consideration of resolution -2009-5, which is an allocation, transfer, and use of the Good Deed Credit Trust account in conjunction with United Water Conservation District's acquisition of Vulcan Materials Company's Barrow property. That's a mouthful. Okay. So in my presentation today, I'll be giving you a little bit of background, providing you with the project setting in relation to the Oxnard Forebay groundwater basin, discussing a little bit of United's proposed project, United's October 15th letter, some of the long-term program benefits, some of the short-term program needs, the proposed draft resolution, some of the monitoring and operational planning that goes with that, and some of the conclusions, and then, of course, a recommendation. So on August 31st, 2000 of this year, United staff met with agency staff to discuss the proposed program to purchase the reclaimed gravel pits from Vulcan Material Company. These gravel pits are located in the Oxnard Plain and are known as the Farrow property. I have some slides to show you that. So as you can see here in this aerial photo, the Satakoy recharge facilities, the upper end you can see the Freeman diversion, Santa Clara River, the various spreading basins, the Rose Pit, and then in the far right corner the Farrow Pit, that property. This is a schematic of what I just showed you. If you look now on the right-hand side, you have the Freeman diversion, the various desilting basins, Satakoy spreading grounds, and in yellow are the Farrow pits, the proposed purchase of. Well, what do we know about the Oxnard Forebay? Well, you've already heard Steve talk quite a bit at past meetings. Most easily recharged basin for recharge, or groundwater basin to recharge. Its hydrogeology is fairly well understood. There's unconfined conditions. The regional groundwater model extends to this basin, and we can do simulations on that. And there's water level and water quality monitoring that is occurring, existing network that's occurring today. So what is United's project proposal? United seeks to limit the long-term expansion of current groundwater use on site, at the current site, limit the water quality degradation from some of the agricultural activities on site, and provide a future potential opportunity to increase recharge through the forebay, through bringing water to this particular site. And these goals are also consistent with our 2007 groundwater management update. Vulcan has agreed as part of this process to transfer almost their entire historical allocation to United and retire their conservation credits. In order to facilitate the property purchase, United proposes to use the Good Deed Trust account established versus the agency's resolution 2002-1, and I have some information I'll present later on that, and the historical allocation be transferred from Vulcan's plan. The credits and allocations And this transfer will enable United to provide supplemental water to the city of Oxnard for partial capital recovery. And during this August 31st meeting with United staff, we did concur with the proposed program and requested that United formalize their request in writing. On October 15th, we received that letter, the formal request. That's included in your agenda packet with the staff report as item 11A. United's letter lays out the details of the proposed program divided into two parts. As I mentioned, the long-term program benefits and short-term program benefits. Let's start with the long-term program benefits. In the long-term pumping reductions, they propose to retire over 12,000 acre-feet of conservation credits held by Vulcan as of the end of this calendar year. They would retire 1,464 acre-feet of historical allocation previously held by Vulcan, and that would occur by 2019. And they would eliminate agricultural water use on 237 acres of land indefinitely. Long-term water quality protection, they would discontinue the use of fertilizer use on those 237 acres indefinitely. And a potential future long-term for this project is the increased recharge in the forebay. The use of the Faro property to recharge the additional water from the Santa Clara River and or recharge groundwater with delivery of recycled water if it's available. Some of the short-term program needs, this program would provide 19,000 acre-feet of groundwater to the city of Oxnard over the next 10 years, 5,500 acre-feet per year in the first 2 years, 2010 and 2011, and 1,000 acre-feet subsequently from the following 8 years, including in 2019. There would also be the redemption of credits on the above described pumping using 867 acre-feet of historical allocation per year transferred from Vulcan's plant side to United, and 11,000 credits from United's Good Deed Trust account. So we've had a number of discussions with United staff over the past few weeks. We've reviewed their letters and we concur with the overall purpose and approach. However, we did identify a few missing elements that were necessary to comply with state law in the ordinance 8.1. We included some of those elements as we drafted proposed resolution 2009, it should say 05. Let's make sure I have the right number. 07, correct number, which is attached as item number 11C of your packet today. We've shared this draft resolution with United staff. We've incorporated comments we've received from both staff and their attorneys, and they've indicated that they concur with it. Within proposed resolution 2009-7, we have CEQA compliance. The city and or United as the lead agencies must comply with that. This is not for the purchase of the property, I want to make clear. This is for the subsequent future use of the site and the extraction. The agency must make a determination the proposed use would not result in a net detriment to the basin, subbasins, or the aquifers within the agency's boundaries. And we've included periodic reports the first 2 years and annual reports thereafter, so the agency gets information, compliance with the resolution, and also to provide a little bit of transparency with the public that we have this information and this information is available for them to review. Moving on, the proposed groundwater extractions from either registered United facilities or the city, they could use either of them in the near forebay area or within the forebay as identified in their monitoring contingency plan. This is a plan that they'll submit within 120 days after action by this board. Pumping limitations included in the resolution. Again, these are things that I've described previously, but use of the Good Deed Trust account would be limited to 11,000 acre-feet. Use of the historical allocation previously held by Vulcan shall be limited to 8,000. There's a 5,500 acre-feet annual cap on pumping. Any good deed trust credits transferred to the city must be used prior to use of any other credits, and that the good deed trust accounts and historical allocations held by Vulcan shall not be used for any other purpose than to deliver water to the city of Oxnard under this program. This program is expected to be completed on or before December 31st, 2019. Per United's request, we did include an exemption here for yearly exemptions if the board chooses, if they haven't completed the necessary water deliveries to the city. And limitation on credits, the United and the city shall not earn conservation credits against the historical allocation previously held by Vulcan, thus not creating a separate credit bank that we would have to deal with in the future. We've included an operation contingency plan. Since currently no specific operational...
Excuse me,
yes.
Is the operational contingency plan part of the resolution?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We've included that because at this date we haven't received specific proposals on where groundwater is going to be extracted or groundwater quality be monitored. So we included that proposal. And it's unknown how this data would be used to adjust some of the operations of the extractions. Therefore, we included both the groundwater monitoring and an operational contingency plan. This is similar to what we've done with other projects. And when I'm going to move on here.
A quick question.
Yes.
So this contingency plan, even though it's not specified here about well locations and things of that nature, it's going to be utilized in the operation of this program.
Mm-hmm. Be using existing, for example, putting this map up here, using existing monitoring network that the city and the United employ. It's not proposing any additional monitoring. It's not proposing any additional monitoring wells be installed, but using our existing monitoring network, proposing a subset, for example. And I've had a fair amount of discussions with Steve over the last couple of days, what shape or form. We've left that up to United and the city to propose something that we would work with them and look at and review.
I'll listen to the rest of the presentation, then I probably have a question.
Okay. So here's a map straight out of our groundwater management plan, some of the BMO monitoring points. And moving forward, this is some of the wells. This is the city's well fields, various well fields, as well as United's well field up in the El Rio area. So again, example, these would potentially are the extraction points. This would be included and in the monitoring plan as well as the contingency plan. Oops. So I included this slide because there might be questions of what's a good deed trust account, and I actually took the opportunity this morning to look at some of the past agendas to see exactly how this program was created in 2002. It was created, there was quite a bit of discussion in 2002 for those folks who probably remember that time. The board did adopt a resolution at that time. It's unique and different from the other credit programs, including conservation credits. The purpose was to use these credits shall be to resolve or contribute to the resolution of or unique groundwater issues of a concern to both agencies. So the unique relationship created between United and the GMA for specific projects, and I think this meets that criteria. It's our opinion. And we don't believe that this is precedent setting with this action with any of our other credit programs. We did receive some correspondence. As I mentioned, the October 15th letter from United, we've attached that. We did have an email from Vulcan Materials Company. We've attached that as well, where they concur with what's been proposed. And we did receive an email from the City of Oxnard dated October 19th, concurring with United's October 15th letter and what was being proposed. So in conclusion, agency staff believe that this proposed program offers long-term benefits for the actors within the agencies. We believe the resolution that you have before you is both procedurally sound and complies with CEQA. that this action today would give United the encouragement it needs for the city's, I said the city's project, but it's actually United's project in conjunction with the city to move forward. This resolution provides checks and balances, that the request for technical information is reasonable. Again, as I mentioned, we're not trying to be onerous. We're not trying to create a situation where this information is going to be burdensome, but it provides information that's transparent, that others can look to this agency, that we're being protective of the groundwater resources. And that this is an equity issue as well, that these requests that we put on are consistent with other conditions for other projects. And lastly, provide stewardship through this resolution of groundwater resources under this agency's jurisdiction. So with that, staff recommends your adoption of proposed resolution 2009-7, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, with that, Dave.
Maybe my question is best answered by someone from United, and then maybe we could look at that map that was up one more time. Steve, perhaps?
This map or the one before?
The one that showed the well location, yeah.
And I'm going to make a presentation in just a minute that you haven't heard yet. Maybe I'll answer some of those questions too.
When are you going to make it? After we vote on this?
Presumably before you vote on it.
Very good.
Then, unless somebody has, does anybody have any specific questions for Gerhard? If they do, I'll deal with those now, and if you need to roll it to after Steve's presentation, we'll do that too. But
For Gerhard and the attorney, yes. Number one, I just want to be clear that doing this all by resolution is going to make this all legally binding instead of doing this by ordinance or some other format.
The resolution is the correct procedure. The ordinance allows for this type of approval.
Great. All right. Thank you. And then both for the attorney, staff reported in there that allowing this to happen with the good deed credits, they believe does not set any precedent for the other credits, because that's a much more sensitive issue and a much more, I'd say, dangerous issue out there if we had the other credits being sold and all of that. Are you in complete agreement with that?
Yes, the Good Deed Credit Program was approved, as was indicated in 02, with specific criteria for redemption of those credits. So based on that, I don't see that there'd be any precedential effect created by approval of what...
As long as we keep this... Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Steve.
Got it, put myself.
We're looking, he's coming up.
He's coming up. Okay. While they're doing that, I might just say, because I think that the Good Deed Trust program has been around long enough that some people forget what it is and how it got earned. This was state water that was purchased by United Water, was brought in. These were actual molecules of new imported water that were brought in through Lake Piru, put in with United's normal release. A portion of that water ends up in the upstream basins, and a portion of it ends up down at the Freeman Diversion and then becomes in lieu recharge or direct recharge or whatever. So, and there are no credits earned on that except for these credits getting put in the Good Deed Trust. So they're totally different than any other kind of credit. So, well, what I'd like to do is just show you very quickly. Always. We know that there's some very good long-term impacts on this, or I should say long-term advantages. One of them, of course, is the potential for using this as additional spreading grounds. The other one is retiring an allocation, so there's actually going to be reduced pumping over the long term. But there are some short-term pumping, as Gerhard just talked about. And I just want to show you kind of what that looks like and what we're talking about. So I did some groundwater modeling of that piece of it. Now, I'm not showing any of the advantages. I'm only showing the pumping part of it because I just wanted to look at that alone. Did 3 model runs. One, it depends whether you're going into a drought or whether you're going into your average years, about what the impact is. So I just put up 2 of those scenarios. The last one is kind of the worst case example, and it's actually not allowed in the ordinance, was if you had to do 11,000 acre feet all in a single year. To give you the results, you do get several feet of drawdown in the forebay, 3 or 4 feet. At the coastline, where we're very worried, of course, about what the water levels change there, was very small. It was less than a foot. And once that pumping was over, again, it's 2 different years where the pumping went on, that the water levels came back to where they would have been if you hadn't done the pumping. That's the beauty of the forebay, is you get some fairly fast recovery. And let me just show you quickly what that looks like. In this case, these are just the years of the model in here. Those are the 2 pumping. By the way, this is what the forebay wells look like. You know, they go up and down by more than 100 feet in wet and dry periods, obviously, so that's why we're seeing all of this, several wet and dry periods in here. Here's where the pumping was applied. You can see there's just a little blip right in there that you can see that's the difference from what that line is, which is the no pumping scenario. So it's kind of with and without project here. If we zoom, that's almost impossible to see. If we zoom in there and look at that, that's this situation right here. And if this works, helps if I don't have my finger in front of it. You can almost not see the separation in there, but it's about 4 feet at its worst during that pumping period. And this is one of the forebay wells that we use for some of the major monitoring. And the other thing to notice is as you come out of that, you can't see anything but a single line. So what you do is once you pump that, then you do get full recovery on that. If we look out, if we're doing this instead in an average year rather than a drought year, you can't even see that 4 feet in there because there's enough water in the system at that point that you're just really not even able to detect it.
When you say you can't see it, where specifically with your point?
Well, that's where the pumping occurred, right through there, and those are 2 lines being plotted on there. One is a without project and one's with the pumping. And they coincide so much that you can't see them. Sorry, I should have made that really clear. On all these, there are 2 lines that are being plotted. Yeah, so I'd say that's pretty much a non-impact we see there. If we look out at the coastal, again, pumping in the drought, it's really hard on this PowerPoint one. There is a tiny bit of separation during those 2 times of pumping, but it's less than a foot. So again, those are 2 lines, one with the pumping and one without the pumping. So it's a really small impact in here. Now, if this was done continually, year after year, we would expect to see some more impact. But because this is such a transient thing, we just don't see the long-term impact. If you do 11,000 acre feet, which we're not going to be doing for 1 year, you start getting just a little bit more separation between those 2 lines, but then coming back in again. So it's about what we expected. I know from past modeling of things that we're getting a relatively small effect with this amount of pumping over a relatively short period for the model. And at the coastal well, again, at 11,000 acre feet, you see a little bit more separation, but not much. So I think that one of the things that puts United in just a little different position than other people doing projects like this is we already have a very large monitoring program, and both for water levels and water quality. And there are times in the forebay that we monitored every single well out there and took water quality samples regularly from every single well, private wells as well. So we have a very good idea of what the forebay looks like. So I think from the monitoring standpoint, it's not a matter of what we decide to do to monitor. We're monitoring already. It's the decision about what we want to use of all the monitoring that we have instead. And that's what we've been talking to the GMA about a little bit. There is a little bit of heartburn on this issue, however, that we're hearing less from United and more from other people, and that is that United's in the business of making sure the aquifer's whole here. And why is it the GMA is putting these kinds of restrictions on United when, in fact, United's the one that's kind of making sure this all works well in the first place? And so that particular aspect is out there. And I've talked to Gerhard about this, and one potential solution is, and I don't think having a monitoring program and then deciding what to do, we don't have any problem with that one. Giving regular reports to the GMA, however, perhaps there's a compromise here of doing something like putting it up on our website to show what's happening. But I think that, as I say, some people have a heartburn really with this. Sounds awfully regulatory with United having to go to the GMA staff, and I don't know, the GMA staff asked United, what's it look like? It's kind of an odd little loop here, So if there's any kind of change, that's something I'd recommend we take a look at that. But I think from the concept of all of this, we're just fine. So.
Okay. Any questions for Steve? Anybody in the audience have questions for Steve? Okay. Thank you.
Just quickly, I think you've answered my questions. Thank you. In United's letter, there was a mention of distributing that pumping, particularly in that initial 2 years, among many wells, so as to not cause a depression. My concern would be some of the agricultural pumpers in that vicinity of Rose Avenue and those areas that, if they had significant drawdown, all of a sudden that might affect them having to lower their pumps, and it wouldn't be so good.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. I neglected to say that. We knew from previous modeling, particularly for the GREAT project, where there would, at the full build out of that, there's potentially quite a bit of this going on, that the least impact in the forebay and the surrounding areas was to spread that pumping out. Makes obvious sense. And so for this, and our general plan is that we do kind of one-third, 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 one-third at an OH, one-third at one of the city's well fields, and another one at another of the city's well fields, to spread that out. And as we see what's going on with that, I think we can adjust that. But this is a relatively small amount of water compared to what's normally pumped by United, for instance. So it's kind of just a little blip in there. So.
Okay. All right, Steve. Thank you. All right. Tony, before you speak, just so everybody is clear here, Supervisor Bennett has to leave at 3:45. That's 36 minutes from now. And I think it's important that the whole board vote on this issue. So, and I don't want to kill discussion, but, and I know, because I sit on United, I know the City of Oxnard supports what we're doing and the like. So with that, I'll turn it to the City of Oxnard. I know they want to speak on this issue. But what I'd like to do is leave enough time so the board can make its decision and all the members have a chance to vote on this before you have to go. Okay.
Chairman Mulhall, I neglected to say one thing. And it's a terrible thing to have to say, but United needs an answer, yes or no, on this because of the timing of a whole bunch of different things related to bonds and related to when this transaction has to take place. So I hate to say it.
Time is of the essence.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Tony.
Tony Emmert, City of Oxnard. I'll try to keep this very brief. Attempt to try to answer two questions. One is, why is the City of Oxnard interested in supporting us? And number two is perhaps a clarification of the operational questions. Number one is the City of Oxnard has partnered with United on any projects, or is interested in partnering on any projects that increase recharge and delivery of water to the right area. So both the issues with seawater intrusion along the Hueneme Road corridor, as well as any projects that will improve recharge in the forebay. So we have an ongoing effort in improving the River Park pits, as well as we are very interested in seeing the Faro pit and the Rose pit used for recharge. Number two is, as we had a very late night conversation with our council, we are basically facing being out of water in the next few years. We have a fairly onerous budget that's been assigned to us by Metropolitan. We're working with Cayuga's staff to adjust that, but this current fiscal year that we're in, we're overpumping our groundwater by somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 acre feet this year. If that trend continues, we will be in big trouble before we finish the expansions of the GREAT program. So we are very interested in anything that will result in helping the City of Oxnard in the short term while we make 2 or 3 years to finish the GREAT program. Briefly, our Public Works Director, Ken Ortega, is going to talk about the GREAT program also. I think that's it on the water supply issue. We've also taken some fairly dramatic water conservation measures. We're working towards water budgets for all of our customers, and we had a very interesting discussion last night about zero water, basically zero net water for all proposed development projects. So if somebody can't bring water to the table, I can't promise a drop of water from imported. There's going to be, our council affirmed that last night, there are no new development projects unless we can partner to develop ongoing water by conservation programs, by extensions of recycled water, or some other creative means to develop a long-term new water supply. So that's sort of the big picture. The operational issues, the City of Oxnard purchases sort of two flavors of water from United through its OH well field and Oxnard-Hueneme pipeline. One flavor of water is through our original OH agreement, and that's basically the sub-allocation that United holds for the City of Oxnard, and we take delivery of that. That's pretty much the first water that we take delivery of, and by January of this year, that will be reduced down to the 75%. The second program that we're involved in is the Municipal and Industrial Supplemental Water Program. That program was approved in May for approximately 6,000 acre feet. The City of Oxnard put in a request for all 6,000 acre feet, and United granted us approximately 5,000 acre feet. So the way it works through the OH system is from July 1 to about December or January, we're able to take our regular allocation of water from United through the OH system, and then somewhere around January or February to the end of June, we try to squeeze in as much of the M&I supplemental water. So that's about all we can normally do and still maintain our blend. We don't have treatment capability. We have the 5 blending stations, but that would be what we would plan to do on the OH system. We would request that the majority of this be transferred to the City of Oxnard, and we would produce most of it through our blending station 1 facility, which is it's the 3rd Street location near the Oxnard Transportation Center, and then that would be run through our desalter and then would be distributed to the system there. Some of those other dots are the one to the west that shows the well out by the golf course. That only supplies the golf course. We have another well that's on an agricultural property that may be there for future development, but there would be no production at those. So we would probably take most of the OH water at our blending station 3 at Wankel and Solar, just west of Rice Road, just south of Gonzales, and we would like to produce most of this 5,500 acre feet at the water yard, the water campus site, and run it to the desalter. So, and it is, as Dr. Bachman shared, that is in keeping with the modeling that was done as part of the GREAT program EIR several years ago. That's back to 2002 probably. So,
okay.
That's it.
Thanks, Tony. Ken.
In the interest of time, I'll try to be quick as well. Chair Mulhart, members of the board, good afternoon. For those of you I haven't had the privilege of introducing myself to you, my name is Ken Ortega, and I am the Public Works Director with the City of Oxnard, formerly the Water Superintendent. And as the chair so duly noted, I don't get out very much anymore because I'm dealing with flood issues among a variety of other things, and I'll try to reverse that by showing up more regularly. And as the chair also so duly noted, I brought along my favorite attorney, so I want to make sure that he has some time to provide some closing comments. My purpose here today before you is for a couple of you on the board, maybe to go back in time a little bit, because about the same time that you established the Good Deed Credit Trust program, you also supported a resolution endorsing the city's groundwater recovery enhancement and treatment program. And for probably the few of you that were on the board at that time, I suspected that there were members of the board back then, and probably members, even including some of those that are in the audience here today, that thought that if they just let let Oxnard talk itself out long enough that this thing would probably just die or go the way of most dodo birds. But I'm here to assure you that the GREAT program is more than alive and well, and also to convey to you that the days ahead before this project comes to fruition are far fewer than the days now behind us. With that said, again, for those of you in the room that don't know or haven't heard about it, the GREAT program, it is an acronym. It stands for Groundwater Recovery, Enhancement, and Treatment. I won't bore you with trying to define what all those terms mean, but just suffice it to say that it's a very holistic solution that, in my opinion, and based on my experience working now in the Oxnard Plain for going on about a decade, is the only new water supply that's being introduced into the water balance equation. With that said, in a real nutshell sense, this is what the GREAT program is essentially by design, almost from day one. This design intent has not changed, or has changed very, very little. Essentially, by reintroducing this new water supply, and I think in the GMA provisos is referred to as a foreign water, into the water balance equation, we have the ability, and for reasons that if time permits I can allude to later, to use this recycled water for any one of three markets. Traditional non-potable uses like golf course irrigation, park irrigation, median irrigation, so forth and so on. We can also use it for direct-to-market ag products. And from a quality perspective, and I'm going to get back to this again in a moment, it's very, very different, and I need you to walk away, if with nothing else, with this understanding today, that we are not talking about tertiary treated recycled water. And not that there's nothing wrong with tertiary treated recycled water. This water is going to advanced water purification processes identical to what Orange County's Water Factory 21 just recently unveiled, and of course what they very successfully operated for many, many decades. And when it's all said and done, this facility here in the Oxnard Plain will only be the fourth facility of its type, of its nature, in the entire world. The only other two facilities or similar installations exist in Singapore and Brisbane, Australia. We do that not because we're necessarily enamored with taking on the additional burden and expense, but because ultimately we want for this water to also be available to replenish the groundwater supplies directly, vis-a-vis a seawater intrusion injection barrier well. Again, this was the concept of the GREAT program that was unveiled in May of 2000, and it's the same program with few subtle changes that we've been pushing on for now going on nearly 9, almost 10 years. By doing that, according to your own bylaws, that equates to a credit or an allocation or entitlement that the city gains, and in exchange we can basically take that recycled water credit, or a credit that was generated using recycling techniques, and use it to extract from other additional groundwater supplies, like, for example, sources like our blending station number 1 desalter, using technologies like the one that we unveiled at the end of last calendar year. It's actually online, and that's the brackish water desalting facility that Mr. Emmert alluded to in his comments. Now, what's also important to note is that while this program provides for the city's water supply needs, it also leaves a lot on the table in terms of opportunities that I'm hoping the GMA and Oxnard and United can discuss, that the entire Oxnard Plain and its associated basins can talk about and start engaging in dialogue to take advantage of. Simply stated, Phase 1 of the GREAT program, from a recycled water perspective, will be capable of treating approximately 7,000 acre-feet of water a year. Build-out of the GREAT program is 28,000 acre-feet of water per year. A big difference. And from the city's general plan, municipal and industrial urban water use build-out perspective, we are only really needing about 3/5 or a little bit less than 3/5 of that build-out capacity. So, you've heard it from me today. There is an opportunity here that we need to discuss going forward, that ag and the basin as a whole can benefit from. Let's see if I got this thing working here. Okay. This just represents, and again, I'm not sure how many of you really understand the magnitude of this project, but the treatment facility is located on the south end of at least the city of Oxnard, just upstream about, as the crow flies, maybe 300 yards from our wastewater treatment facility, which is down at the bottom of Perkins Avenue, which is just right off of Wainini Road. Our recycled water treatment facility is just a little bit upstream of that, and then we have a backbone pipeline over 12 miles of infrastructure that will be installed that will go due north on Perkins, due west on Wainimi Road, due north on Ventura Road, all the way crossing the 101 freeway bridge undercrossing at Ventura Road and connecting into the dual plumb system that's already been installed as part of the entitlement of the River Park project. So overnight, we will have one of the largest recycled water backbone conveyance systems in the county and actually in Southern California. In addition to that, and it's not on this map, I don't know how many of you are aware of this fact, but the City of Oxnard owns and operates and maintains the Ocean View Municipal Water Pipeline. That pipeline is a conveyance facility that extends due east on Wainimi Road almost all the way out to Point Magoo. So there is a backbone that can serve ag, the seawater injection barrier component, plus the traditional non-potable uses that we've been discussing throughout today's presentation. Most importantly, and this is where I was hearkening back to the days of yore when I first started with this program back in '99, actually, from a concept level, this is where the schedule is real. We've been, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, the victims of our own success. We applied for $20 million of ARA stimulus funding under the President's program, Title 16 Department of Bureau of Reclamation, Department of Interior money. We were granted $20 million. We presented a comprehensive utility rate adjustment proposal to the City Council last night. It was approved. We are out to bid on the advanced water purification facility. Bids are scheduled to be open on the 25th. As a condition of approval on our grant, we are required to start producing at the very least 1,000 acre-feet of recycled water on or before the end of 2011. So it's happening, it's coming, it's sooner rather than later. I'm here to just again echo the support of this particular program and really to hopefully have you also take away from my part of this presentation the fact that what we need, what we're requesting, what the City of Oxnard desires is a bridge. We need some support during this very short period of time, the next 24 to 30 months, until these facilities are up and doing what they've always been designed and planned to do. We need some assistance, and that's why we were so supportive and encouraging of United's efforts to acquire the Faro Pit. While I'm going to ask my colleague to express some of our concerns with the resolution as it's presently been presented to you, we want to, from the City of Oxnard's perspective, completely support 110%, the proposal that is before you today for your consideration.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rob.
Rob Saperstein for City of Oxnard. I'll be very brief, but I'm going to do a bit of a dangerous thing with full respect that the hope, expectation, need is a passage of a resolution today, one form or another. But I'll ask the clerk to hand out a shortened version of what was in the agenda package. And what City of Oxnard's tried to do is marry what the GMA has with some of the concepts that Dr. Bachman had expressed. And the overarching view is the partnership of the United and GMA in particular in moving this program forward presents a different regulatory structure, a different set of capabilities than any other project proponent coming in here asking for some sort of special request for credit use within the GMA. So the irony of all of this is the proposed staff resolution had an extensive prospective design this program, bring it in with 120 days, and in fact United does all of it. United has that monitoring program in place, and in fact all United would do is say this is what we do, and the irony again would be GMA staff would ask United to just report to them what's the monitoring look like. So I've tried to embed that concept that the monitoring program already exists, and that the change in this resolution, and I'll walk through the rest of it, the meaningful change in the resolution is an acknowledgement that the monitoring program already exists, and that the GMA board acknowledges that United is doing all of those things, and I included actually the list of the itemized criteria in the resolution that you had in your agenda package as that criteria for which United already complies with in its routine monitoring. It'll continue to do that, and it'll report on a regular basis back to this board the results of this program. Recognize this program is just a bridge. The meaningful pumping of the Good Deed Credit Trust happened in 2 years, and then we're basically back to business as usual. So I'll quickly walk through what the clerk has handed you. The recitals are essentially identical to what existed in the original GMA drafted resolution.
There are 3 extras.
I'm sorry?
There are 3 more.
3 more.
Whereas,
Yeah, and Director Craven.
so they're not exactly the same.
Yeah, so I took those and added.
Essentially, that's legal term.
Well,
3 more isn't essentially to a board member.
And I'm trying to be respectful of time, so I'm moving through this as quickly as I can. What I did was take the resolutions that GMA had drafted and add to it acknowledgement that United also has a regulatory overlay in monitoring and managing the same groundwater resources. That was left out of the original resolution. Recall, the Good Deed Trust was a partnership between United and the GMA, that nothing happens with those Good Deed Trust credits unless both United and the GMA agree that the use is appropriate. And those are the recitals that I've added to the resolution, that United is a part of that overall program. The change, while the form will look different, what I also tried to do is simplify, because it was very difficult to pull out of both.
Rob, let me stop you a second and back up, because I think you said the important thing, but I want to make sure everybody understands. When I proposed the name was given. When I
try to not use the Mulhard Good Deed
don't do
Trust.
I see people laughing out there. When we created the Good Deed Trust, the concept was very clear. No trust credits can be used for any project unless both the United Board and the GMA Board approved it.
Okay.
So what he's essentially saying is that the GMA is putting a burden on the city and United to do a report that, in fact, United is the one that does the report that they're going to review themselves. It's a vicious circle that goes nowhere. That's essentially what you're saying.
Exactly what I'm saying, and it goes to the urgency that United has in trying to get this program approved consistent with its timing. It can't wait 120 days, perhaps, to get a monitoring program that it already has in place approved, because this board doesn't even meet until December again. We're in a bit of a chase our own tail here.
Okay. All right.
The body of the resolution has the same substance, all of the same requirements that the GMA had, and I'll walk through them, but I tried to make it a little more clear exactly what number of credits are being transferred at what time, what credits and allocation are being retired at what time, on what conditions there are in the use of the 11,000 acre-feet of Good Deed Trust credits versus the 1,000 acre-foot over a period of 8 years of the allocation that's being transferred, and make more clear when the retirement of those allocations are going to occur. It was very difficult to capture that from the GMA original resolution. What I pulled in that I know is very important to the GMA is an acknowledgement that United is the lead agency for CEQA purposes, both for the original acquisition of the properties and any subsequent use of those properties. That's in this resolution. Also included is an acknowledgement that United and the city will provide ongoing reports back to the agency on the monitoring program that's already in place. Along with that will be reporting of the use of the credits and an allocation on a semi-annual basis. It'll be incorporated in the normal reporting for the OH system, for the Oxnard wells. The last piece that's more detailed that was in the GMA resolution is making clear that the pumping of the credits and allocation will only occur at the OH well field, so the El Rio well field, and Oxnard blending station 1 and 3, so that it's very clear where the credits and allocation can be pumped from, resolve some of the questions that have been asked.
Let me ask you this. Jeff, have you guys seen this?
No.
Okay.
And apologize for that, and we had some discussion real time over the last 24 hours, and this is where we are.
All right. From a mechanical standpoint, I understand what Rob is presenting here. I understand the issues, and his format of dealing with the numbers is a lot easier to read than what the GMA has proposed. I do agree, however, that having United basically report itself on itself as a vicious circle doesn't make a lot of sense, given the fact that United is doing this reporting. All it's done is change the pumping pattern, and it has the capability to do that change. How do we, is it possible to adopt a resolution? I don't know how you adopt a resolution subject to some kind of review. I mean, it's fundamentally not fair if you guys have not seen it. And for the board, you're supposed to make recommendations.
And I'm thoroughly confused by the differences in numbers. I mean, there are 6 more now therefore be it resolved in the proposed one than there are in the existing ones, and they've redone. I'm not trying to say I don't trust attorneys. It's just that the numbers aren't the same when you look at the various now therefore be it resolved. So I don't know how they equate, and in a very short time to get all our vote, you're going to have to speak quickly to tell me how you got these numbers out of the numbers that we've been told earlier.
Let me, if I may, is it possible, Al, and Rob's here and staff is here, is it possible to adopt the current GMA draft so we can push the ball down the court and come back at our next board meeting, and if there needs to be changes to the resolution, rescind that resolution by adopting its cleanup resolution? Is that mechanically a way of addressing some of the issues you've raised, at the same time respecting the fact that you can't come in at the 11th hour and hand GMA a resolution that has the kind of issues that are being raised and not have a chance to review it? I don't know any public agency that would ever be, and I can't see how we'd ever adopt a resolution pending staff approval. That doesn't make sense at all.
Well, I think that would be more a question for United and the city. Certainly, from a procedural standpoint, the board can adopt staff's proposed resolution and then at its next meeting consider any revision or supplement to that resolution. But I think that the more pressing issue is what Dr. Bachman referred to as the time being of the essence matter. Just in my review of what's been submitted, I see one major change from staff's proposal to what's being presented here is that it's gone from a will approve to a does approve action. And I don't know if that goes to the issue of urgency that was mentioned.
And what council is referring to is does approve the monitoring program. So all the same criteria is listed in the resolution that's just been handed to you as existed in the original GMA resolution. Instead of it to be submitted to the agency, it is all of the monitoring United already does. So it's an acknowledgement that United is doing it, and the agency approves that form of monitoring as being compliant with what the agency requires.
Okay, Rob, if we adopt the staff's, the GMA staff's resolution with the change that your paragraph 4 is substituted for the staff's paragraph 4, do we accomplish 90% of what we need to get accomplished? And the rest of it is cleanup stuff. If it needs to be, it can be done, as Al suggested, at some cleanup point.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's the answer, Charlotte, is we adopt the resolution 0907 and substitute this paragraph 4 for their paragraph 4. And I'm doing this out loud in front of staff and the board, and I got to hear from them on what they're willing to do.
Well, I mean, there just does not make any sense to me to take a resolution that's been out there for public review and then say we're going to take, look at, if we're not changing one word here, we're changing, a whole paragraph that deals with this. There is no way I can feel comfortable knowing that I know the differences between those at this point in time. I just don't think that it happens. I think we need to have a we need to have an opportunity for staff to respond in terms of why is staff asking for United to report. After hearing from United about why they feel like they shouldn't report, my question is I still need to have a better understanding of what's the big deal, because there, when it comes to the issue of groundwater there, I think having some checks and United is as good as it gets out there in terms of doing this, but still, what is the great harm in having the reports go to staff? All that needs to be explored, and so I would not be supportive of taking from here to here. I mean, this isn't a red line version where you can very clearly see what's gone out of here and what is in here. So anyway, I just want to let you know that wouldn't make sense today. I'm happy to review all this stuff and look at it in another month, but it sounds like people can't wait that long. But that's not good government from my standpoint.
I'll make one quick clarification and then back away, because the interest is getting something adopted. So this was an intent to make it cleaner, simpler, more consistent with some of the timing requirements and the impact of having some equivocal subsequent conduct interaction between United and GMA that creates some contingencies that make things difficult. It's not that United won't be reporting. The intent was to make it clear that United is already doing the monitoring program that the GMA had in its resolution suggested had to be created. It already does it, and all that is intended here is to acknowledge it does it.
If I could say, if it's already created and staff is asking for them to create it, then can't they just say, here it is? And so I don't know what the
and that's why I'll step away and leave it at that. We were trying to make the resolution cleaner, but given the interest of time.
Okay, and it may be, Rob, it may be that it says the plan shall be submitted not later than 120 days after adoption. Maybe tomorrow you give them the plan.
That's for the technical folks to talk about. So.
But let me speak to this issue of urgency. It deals with a whole, this has been a very difficult process for United and everybody to go through. It has long-term benefits for everybody in the area to get these gravel pits into the United fold and not turn them into fertilizer fields, frankly. And Vulcan doesn't live here. They live in North Carolina, and so United has been working on this for a long time. Long term, this makes sense. But with bonds and all the other little nuances that go through, making sure that the city of Oxnard has a bridge of water until the great program comes online, all of these are part of a master water plan, and the whole intent of the Good Deed Trust was to be able to facilitate these kinds of programs, but for the lack of something to tip the scale to make it economically viable. That's what the Good Deed Trust was designed for. It's real water that was really brought in, that United really has in its credit, and when we created it, we gave two checks and balances, the GMA and United, so we wouldn't just spend it frivolously. This is the kind of program it was intended to do. And I understand the dilemma, and you can't make soup here in front of everybody, or whatever it is the term is. So I'm okay with adopting the resolution, and then if in your discussions down the road you think there ought to be some changes to the resolution or modifications to the resolution or a new resolution, you always have the opportunity to bring that back to us and we'll deal with it at the time. But I think time is of the essence, particularly.
Mr. Chairman, who gets the right to bring the proposed revision forward? Can the city? Can United, or does it have to originate with GMA staff?
I would say that anybody could bring it to the GMA staff and say, hey, we'd like to make these. Again, this is a partnership between United, the GMA, and the city of Oxnard. All three of us as entities are trying to go for the same goal, and that is ultimately increase the water supply improve the water quality, make sure that the GREAT program comes online in a logical sequence, retire as much credits as we can, retire some pumping patterns, and prevent fertilizer in gravel basins that directly go to the aquifer. So I would submit that if any one of the three entities want to make changes to it, the three entities ought to be talking together as they've been talking together. Rob has brought an 11th hour change. I agree, having thought about it and what you said. To make those 11th hour changes just don't work. Let's get something in place, and then if the three entities agree we ought to have changes, then bring it back to the board and we'll deal with it.
And if I could, and Director Kelly's question, I mean, the democratic process is anybody can bring us the changes. We have public comment. They could at public comment. It would be obviously better. We would feel more comfortable if it went to our staff. Our staff reviewed it, and if they brought it to us at a public meeting. But the democratic process is, and I want to make sure we're on record. If Oxnard's got changes to this, and our staff doesn't like them, Oxnard can still bring them.
I had some discussion with GMA staff this morning for some time on the same issue, and I think these issues were brought to them and they rejected it.
Okay.
Hence, the reason we're here was that, but we're not worried that we can't come back and get the board's attention. That's not the issue. We were literally working on this past 2 days trying to see if we could come to some accommodation. Didn't happen. No disrespect meant to the board, and understand we're under time constraints. So particularly if Director Bennett needs to leave.
Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
As the city's rep, I just want to explain that I am a slow reader, I'm a slow thinker. I read what's sent to me, and I can't digest stuff coming just before we vote. And so I can't support changes other than things I can really understand. So with that having been said, I would move to adopt resolution number 2009-7 of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, a resolution concerning allocation, transfer, and use of good deed credit trust account in conjunction with United Water Conservation District's acquisition of Vulcan Materials Company's Faro property. And to be clear, it's the one that was presented in our packet.
Okay, that's the motion.
Second?
Motion is second. Any discussion?
I just have one comment. I know Director Kelly. I mean, staff. I don't know why staff. If you say there was communication, but that's what staff is supposed to do: is evaluate and decide what to bring, and that's what Oxnard's supposed to do. Try to work it out, and if they don't, decide, then make another. So those are all just decisions that take place in the process, right?
Or call us.
Okay. Any other comments? Any comments from the audience? Roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, very good. That's done.
Thank
We
you
got
very
you out on
much.
time.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, let's go to, because we're going to go into closed session, and is it possible to, since all of these informational items are receive and file, unless individuals have specific questions on any of these, are we okay just to receive and file?
Move to receive and file items 5 through 7.
A motion and a...
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, Brian, I saved you. Okay, Al, that is it for the...
He has to give the magic words.
Yeah, I have to give the magic words. We're going to adjourn to closed session, and then following closed session, will we reconvene for an outbrief? Is that correct? Yes or no?
There may be an announcement following closed session.
Okay. Meeting adjourned. All right. Super duper.